What if one man's decision, made in the span of a single breath, unravels the entire architecture of a war? What if the blade does not fall? What if Jaime Lannister, that golden contradiction, that knight who killed the king he swore to protect, chooses on this particular morning in this particular plaza to be something other than what everyone believes him to be? The crowd at Baelor is enormous. Thousands of them pressed together beneath a sky the color of pale ash, their voices a low and restless tide, their eyes all fixed on the same point. On the man kneeling in the dust with his head bowed, the great gray sword called Ice glinting in the hands of Island Payne. Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, a man who has never once in his life bent toward dishonesty, kneels now in the consequence of that honesty. The sept of Baelor rises behind him like a cathedral of judgment. Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name, sits elevated above it all, dressed in gold and malice, his boy's face arranged into an expression of borrowed cruelty. He has been told what power looks like. He is performing it now. The headsman lifts Ice. The crowd holds its breath. The silence is the kind that precedes not just death, but transformation. The silence before the world becomes a different world than it was, and then the horse comes. It comes hard through the press of bodies, cutting through the assembled thousands with a force and purpose that scatters people sideways like water. The rider is Jaime Lannister. There is no mistaking him. That leonine face, that ease in the saddle that is almost arrogance, that white cloak of the Kingsguard spreading behind him like a declaration. He rides as though the crowd is not there. He rides as though only one thing exists in the entire plaza, and that thing is the man kneeling on the stone. He does not slow. He does not hesitate. He drives his horse directly between Island Payne and Ned Stark, and the great sword Ice swings wide and catches nothing but air, and Jaime Lannister pulls his mount to a halt in a thunder of hooves and says, in a voice pitched to carry across every stone at every body and every stunned and open mouth in that plaza, that the execution is stayed. A royal stay, pending new evidence, pending review. The words are precise. They are the words of procedure and law, words that no one in that crowd can immediately argue against, because they are dressed in the correct clothing of authority. He invokes his station in the Kingsguard. He speaks the words as though they have already been decided somewhere above this moment, as though he is merely the instrument of a conclusion already reached. Joffrey begins screaming almost immediately. The boy king's voice cracks with fury, with the particular humiliation of a child who has been publicly denied something he has already announced he will have. He screams for the execution to proceed. He screams Ned Stark's name and his crimes. He screams Jaime's name with a venom that is almost impressive in one so young. The crowd watches all of this and understands with the instinct of crowds that something far larger than an execution is happening in front of them. Jaime does not move. He sits his horse between Joffrey's command and Ned Stark's neck, and he is very still, and that stillness is its own kind of speech. He does not argue with Joffrey. He does not explain himself. He simply remains where he is, and the message is understood by everyone present, most of all by Ilyn Payne, who lowers Ice slowly, because even the king's justice recognizes when the geometry of power has become too complicated to act within. The standoff holds for a long and terrible moment. The thousands assembled say almost nothing. This is the silence of people witnessing the fracturing of something they had believed to be solid. Far back from the plaza, in the cool geometry of a recessed doorway, a small man in fine gray wool watches all of this with the attention of someone who has been watching things carefully for many years. Varys, the master of whisperers, has a face designed for concealing thought, and he conceals it now, though something moves behind his eyes that might, in another man, be called surprise. He watches Jaime Lannister refuse to move. He watches Joffrey's authority collapse against that refusal, like water against stone. He understands immediately what this means, not just for this morning, not just for Ned Stark, but for the entire construction of Lannister power in King's Landing, which is depended, as all such constructions do, on the appearance of unity. There is a fracture forming. Varys can see it as clearly as he can see the sword still trembling in Payne's lowered hands. A fracture inside the most powerful family in the Seven Kingdoms, made public before 10,000 witnesses on the steps of Baelor the Blessed. He does not waste time marveling at it. He is already turning away from the doorway, already composing in his mind the precise and careful words of the message that will need to travel north before nightfall, to a war camp beside a river, to a young king who does not yet know that his father is still breathing. The black cells are precisely what their name suggests. No window, no fire, no distinction between night and day, between the hour of wolves and the hour of the sun climbing above the black water. A man brought low enough finds that time itself becomes a kind of cruelty, shapeless and without mercy, and Ned Stark has been low enough for some time now. He sits on the cold floor with his back against the cold stone, and he breathes, because breathing is the one discipline left to him, the one act still entirely his own. He does not hear the footsteps until they are very close. The man who enters carries a single torch and no guards, which is itself a kind of message. Jaime Lannister in the Black Cells is a sight that does not belong to any world Ned Stark had imagined. And yet here he stands, gold and shadow, the torch throwing his famous face into relief that makes him look, for just a moment, almost ancient, almost tired in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. He does not apologize. Jaime Lannister has never been a man who apologizes. What he says instead is quieter than Ned expects, and more honest than anything Ned has heard from a Lannister in longer than he can remember. He says that what happened on the steps of the Sept was not done out of mercy. He is careful to say that. He wants there to be no confusion between them about motives, no debt of sentiment that does not exist. What he did because the alternative, because watching what comes next if Joffrey is allowed to proceed without check, is something he cannot afford to watch. Ned listens. This is what careful men do. They listen before they respond, because the information in another man's words often exceeds the words themselves. Jaime speaks of Cersei the way a man speaks of a building he designed and now cannot enter safely, a structure that has grown beyond its original architecture into something he no longer fully recognizes. He speaks of Joffrey with a flatness that is more damning than anger would be. He says the boy is not what either of them believed he would become. He says there is a difference between a king who is cruel and a king who is without instinct for consequence, and that Joffrey has become the second, which is the more dangerous of the two. A cruel king can be managed. A king who does not understand that his actions produce reactions, that power has a physics as precise and unforgiving as any other force in the world. That king is not a tyrant. He is a catastrophe still in the process of unfolding. He does not finish the thought. He does not need to. Ned says nothing for a long moment. Then he says that he is surprised Jaime Lannister can still recognize a catastrophe, given how many he has contributed to. It is not a kind thing to say. It is the true thing, and in the black cells, there is very little room for anything else. Jaime looks at him across the torchlight with an expression that is not quite a smile and not quite its opposite. He leaves before Ned can determine what it was. The fracture that Varys saw forming on the steps of Baelor does not close in the days that follow. It deepens. It moves through the Red Keep the way fissures move through old stone. Not loudly, not all at once, but with a slow and structural certainty that experienced builders learn to fear. Cersei Lannister is not a woman who fears things quietly, and when she summons Jaime to her chambers, it is not a summons so much as a command delivered in the key of fury. She is extraordinary in her anger. This has always been true. There is a quality to Cersei's rage that lesser men have mistaken for weakness, because it is emotional and therefore readable. But emotion, as concentrated as hers, has never been weak. It is a force. It moves through the room, ahead of her words, and her words, when they come, are precise despite their heat. She tells Jaime what he has cost her. She tells him with the specificity of someone who has been accounting the damage since the moment it occurred, cataloging every consequence with the thoroughness of a treasurer who cannot afford to miss a single figure. He undermined her authority. He undermined Joffrey's authority, which is the same thing, which is perhaps more grievous still. He chose, in front of 10,000 people, to place his own judgment above the judgment of the crown. And there is no version of that choice that does not make every lord in every hall in the Seven Kingdoms wonder whether the Lannister name still means what it once meant. Jaime lets her finish. This too is unusual. The Jaime of earlier years would have interrupted, would have deflected with wit or deflected with charm, because charm was always his preferred armor against her particular kind of assault. He does not reach for it now. When she is done, what he says is simple and devastating, and delivered in a voice so level it lands like cold water. He says that Joffrey is not fit to rule. He says it plainly, the way a physician names a sickness, without drama, because drama would allow her to argue with the delivery rather than the substance. He says that what they made together, what their sin produced, has grown into something neither of them can contain, and that the question now is not whether to acknowledge that truth, but what to do before it becomes everyone else's truth as well. Cersei's face does something complicated. The silence that follows is not empty. It is full of every calculation she is running simultaneously, every possible response weighed and measured and set aside one after another, until she arrives at the response she chooses, which is to say nothing at all. Sometimes silence from Cersei Lannister is capitulation. Sometimes it is the stillness before a storm changes direction. Jaime cannot tell, in this moment, which one this is, and that uncertainty is itself a new kind of dangerous. Sansa Stark is brought to the Black Cells 3 days later. The guards who escort her are the kind of men who pretend not to listen with the practiced expertise of men who never stop listening. And both Ned and his daughter understand this before a single word passes between them. She has grown in the months at court, not in height alone, but in the particular wariness behind her eyes that replaces innocence, when innocence is educated by pain. She is still beautiful. She is less soft. Ned holds her for a moment and says nothing, because some things are for the body first and the mind second, and she has been held by no one she trusts for a very long time. Then he draws back and looks at her carefully and speaks quietly and precisely, the way a man speaks when he knows every word may be examined later by people he does not trust. He tells her to find a way. He does not say to do what or how. He says that Robb must know the ground has shifted, that whatever plans are being made in the war camp beside the river must account for a world in which the easy answers are no longer available. Vengeance, he says, is a fire that consumes the house it is meant to warm. He says caution now is worth more than any army, more than any victory in the field, more than any banner raised in anger. He says this knowing that Robb is young and furious and capable of all the magnificent mistakes that youth and fury produce in equal measure. Sansa listens the way she has learned to listen in this court, completely still, every word stored, nothing visible on her face. She nods once, so slightly that the guards do not register it. And then the guards are moving again. The audience is ending, and she is being drawn back toward the door, back toward the red corridors of the keep and the life she must continue performing for people who are watching her for any sign that she is more than an ornament and a hostage. She does not look back as she leaves. She is already thinking about which of the few people she might still trust enough to carry a message north, and whether any of them are trustworthy enough, and whether trustworthy enough is even a standard that exists anymore in King's Landing, in the season of Joffrey Baratheon's reign. In the corridor outside the black cells, one of the guards who pretended not to listen is already deciding who he will tell first. The Raven arrives at River Run before dawn, carried on tired wings through a sky the color of cold iron. Robb Stark is awake when it comes. He has not slept. He reads Varys's words once, then again, then a third time. Not because he does not understand them, but because understanding them requires him to become a different kind of man than the one he was when he lay down the previous night. His father is alive. His father is alive, and the chain of cause and effect that was pulling the North toward open war has shifted. The tension in it changed, not broken, but redirected, like a river diverted by a single stone, placed in precisely the right position. He calls his bannermen. The solar at River Run fills with men who carry the smell of campfires and the hard patience of lords who have waited long enough. The Greatjon arrives first and loudest, as the Greatjon always does, his frame filling the doorway before the rest of him enters the room. He has been sharpening his appetite for war across weeks of waiting, and he is not a man who unsharpen easily. Robb watches him read the news in the set of Robb's jaw, and watches the confusion bloom behind those fierce eyes, and watches the confusion curdle almost immediately into something adjacent to anger. What was promised? Blood, battle, the clean grammar of revenge, is being renegotiated without his consent. The other lords arrive in clusters. Lord Karstark, who lost a brother to Lannister steel, and who carries that loss like a stone sewn into his chest. Lord Bracken and Lord Blackwood, who have hated each other for centuries, and have found in this war a rare and useful alignment of purpose. They fill the room, these men, and the room fills with their noise, and for a moment Robb Stark stands at the head of the table and lets that noise wash over him, and does not speak. Then he speaks. He speaks quietly, which is the one thing he has learned that his father never entirely mastered. That silence before speech teaches a room to lean toward you. He lays out Varys' intelligence with care. His father breathes. Jaime Lannister, the man each of them would cheerfully have watched hang, has done something that cannot easily be categorized. Not mercy precisely, not treachery to his own house exactly. Something stranger and harder to name. A calculation. A move on a board none of them can fully see. The Great John does not like it. He says so. He says so with the particular volume and structural completeness that the Great John brings to all objections, which is to say that the walls of Riverrun register his displeasure as a minor geological event. He speaks of crowns and independence, and the North kneeling to no southern throne since the days of Torrhen Stark, and several of the other lords grip their cups a little tighter and nod, because these are true things, and true things have weight regardless of what new intelligence has arrived on tired wings in the small hours of the morning. Robb hears all of it. He does not disagree with any of it. He simply says that a war fought for a man already dead and a war fought for a man still living are two different wars, and that the second war requires different conditions before it can be justified to the gods and to history. He does not say, "I am not yet certain I can win the first kind." He does not need to. The men in this room are lords, not children. They can perform the calculation without being handed the answer. The momentum toward his crowning, that tide that had been building with the particular powerful inevitability of things that feel historic in the moment, it does not recede, but it splinters. There are those who want the crown placed on his head before another sun rises, who see in any delay the smell of capitulation, who believe that the moment you declare willingness to negotiate, you have already conceded the argument. And there are those, fewer, quieter, who recognize that a living Ned Stark is an asset that dead Ned Stark could never be. That a father returned changes the shape of everything, including the shape of what a son is permitted to want. The council ends without resolution, which is itself a kind of resolution. Robb has bought time. He has bought it at the cost of disappointing men he needs, and he understands this. And he carries it with the particular compressed weight of a young commander, learning that leadership is largely the art of choosing which debts to accumulate. Somewhere to the south, on a narrow road that cuts through hill country, where the wind smells of pine and old stone, Catelyn Stark's horse rounds a bend and finds the road blocked, not by enemies, by 12 riders in formation, their horses still, their livery the gold and crimson of House Lannister, but above them, tied to a lance and moving in the cold morning air with a kind of formal gravity, a white flag, a flag of truce. The rider at their center holds his hands open and visible, a gesture older than any banner, older than any house that means, "I have not come to fight." Catelyn does not reach for a weapon, but she does not relax. She reads the riders the way she has learned to read rooms. Every posture, every angle, the particular stillness of men who've been given orders to appear unthreatening and who are working at it with professional effort. The lead rider speaks. He has a message, he says, from Ser Jaime Lannister. He has an escort, he says, authorized and arranged. He has a destination, he says, King's Landing, under protection, under truce, under terms that Sir Jaime has committed his name to. Catelyn says nothing for a long moment. The wind moves the white flag above them. She is thinking about her husband, who was alive when he should not be. She is thinking about her son, who is building toward war in a room she cannot reach. She is thinking about the nature of traps, how the best ones always look exactly like this, like an open hand, like a flag in pale morning light. She asks only one question. She asks it simply, without inflection, in the tone of a woman who has learned that the manner in which you ask a thing reveals almost as much as the answer. She asks who sent the original message to Winterfell, and she watches the lead writer's face for the fraction of a second before he answers. Because that fraction is where the truth lives, if truth is still something that can be found on a road in this broken kingdom. The writer hesitates, just barely, just enough. The writer hesitates, just barely, just enough. And somewhere south of that road, south of that pale flag and that cold morning and that woman's unblinking gaze, a throne is already beginning to splinter. What if power once seized cannot be held by hands too small for it? What if the moment Ned Stark did not die, the boy who ordered his death began to die himself? Not in body, not yet, but in authority, in credibility, in the quiet, uncountable ways that kings are unmade before anyone thinks to call it unmaking? What if Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, is already a ruin that has not yet realized it is ruined? The court at King's Landing feels the shift before it understands it. Courts always do. They are sensitive instruments, attuned to the vibrations of power the way a spider's web is attuned to wind. Not through intelligence necessarily, but through the accumulated instinct of survival. Something has changed in the throne room, something in the quality of the silences, something in the way the king's eyes move when he sits in that massive, grotesque chair of forged swords, scanning faces with a hunger that is not curiosity, but its darker cousin, the need to find an enemy to punish in place of the one that was taken from him. Ned Stark was supposed to kneel. He was supposed to confess and bleed and fall, and the crowd was supposed to roar, and Joffrey was supposed to feel the particular ecstasy that comes from absolute dominion over another person's life. That moment has been stolen from him. He does not know quite by whom. He does not know quite how. He knows only the absence of it, the hollow where the triumph was supposed to live. And into that hollow pours something uglier, something that manifests first in small cruelties and then in larger ones, accelerating in the way that avalanches accelerate, gathering mass and speed and terrible momentum. Sansa Stark is in the throne room when it happens. She is always in the throne room now, a prisoner dressed as an ornament, and she has learned to make herself very still, very small, very careful, a skill that will serve her for the rest of her life, though she does not know that yet. Sir Meryn Trant's gauntlet is not a political calculation. It is a tantrum-wearing armor. Joffrey watches with that bright, focused attention he reserves for pain, and the small council watches Joffrey. And what the small council sees is not a king who has grown into cruelty, but a boy who has grown into nothing else. A boy for whom cruelty is the only available vocabulary. The bruises on Sansa's face are, in the cold calculus of the men watching, less concerning than what they reveal about the mind behind them. A king who beats his betrothed in public because his entertainment was denied him is a king who will eventually beat everything within reach. A king who will beat everything within reach cannot be managed, cannot be predicted, cannot, and here's the word that begins to circulate in whispers, cannot be trusted with the actual machinery of governance. Grandmaster Pycelle moves slowly and speaks slowly, and is, despite every appearance to the contrary, neither slow nor simple. He has served 4 kings. He knows what the end of a reign smells like. He approaches Cersei in her solar with the deferential posture of a man delivering a medical opinion and the eyes of a man delivering a verdict. And he uses the word regency as one might use a surgeon's blade, carefully, precisely, watching for the flinch. It comes. Cersei does not strike him, but only because she has calculated in the half-second available to her that striking him would be worse than enduring him. She dismisses him instead, and the dismissal is so absolute and so cold that Pycelle bows and retreats without another word. But the word itself does not leave with him. It remains in the room like smoke after a candle is blown out, shapeless but present, impossible to ignore entirely. Pater Baelish is more elegant about it, because Pater Baelish is elegant about everything, because elegance is his armor and his weapon and his particular form of genius. He does not come with a proposal. He comes with a concern. He is worried, he tells Cersei, in the intimate register of a man who considers himself an ally, about perception, about how the king appears to the great houses, about whether there is a way, perhaps through a restructured council with slightly expanded authority, to smooth certain rough edges before they catch on anything important. He does not use the word regency. He has no need to. Cersei hears it anyway. She is cleverer than either of these men accounts for, and she knows exactly what is being offered and what is being threatened, and she refuses with the same ferocity she brought to Pycelle, though in Baelish's case, it is wrapped in a smile that does not reach anywhere near her eyes. She is right to refuse. She is also right to be afraid, and she is afraid in the deep, locked chamber of herself, where she keeps things she cannot afford to acknowledge, not of Pycelle, not of Baelish, of the question underneath their questions, the one neither man was quite bold enough to ask aloud. The question of whether Joffrey can be controlled at all. The question of whether she, his mother, who made him and protected him and placed him on that throne through acts that cannot be undone and cannot be spoken of, whether she has built something that will eventually devour her, along with everything else. The Kingsguard session begins badly and ends catastrophically, which is to say, it ends in the particular way that Joffrey's rages tend to end, with something irreversible having been said or done before anyone could construct the architecture of prevention. Jaime Lannister is not present at court. Jaime Lannister is on a road north of the city, bound by oaths and strategy and the peculiar honor of a man who was never supposed to have any. His absence is, to Joffrey, an affront of the highest order, and affronts require responses, and Joffrey's responses have never been proportionate to anything. He strips the white cloak from Jaime's name in open session, loudly, with the particular satisfaction of a child breaking something valuable. He removes him from the Kingsguard entirely, proclaims it, demands the small council witness the proclamation, and the small council witnesses it with the careful, composed expressions of people who are simultaneously recording every detail and revealing nothing of what they think. What Joffrey does not understand, cannot understand, perhaps, because understanding it would require him to see beyond himself in ways he has never learned, is that the Kingsguard is not simply a ceremonial function. It is a relationship. 7 knights who have sworn their lives to a single purpose, who have trained together, bled together, kept vigil in the same cold corridors through the same long nights. Oaths in this world are architecture. They are the load-bearing walls of everything. And Jaime Lannister, whatever else he is, whatever his history and his reputation and the terrible name that follows him like a shadow, is someone these men know. They have stood beside him. They have fought beside him. And Joffrey, who has stood beside no one and fought nothing, is someone they serve because the oath requires it and for no other reason. By nightfall, through the particular invisible network of glances and silences and conversations that never technically happen, it is understood by everyone in the King's Guard who is paying attention, which is all of them, because surviving in service to a volatile king makes one very attentive. That loyalty is a more complicated word than it used to be. That there are those among the seven who would follow the white cloak, and those who would follow the man who wore it. The line between those two positions is narrow, for now. But lines have a way of widening, given enough pressure and enough time, and pressure is the one resource Joffrey's reign produces in absolute abundance. The throne room is quiet now, in the deep hour before dawn. The Iron Throne itself sits empty in the dark, as it does every night. Those thousands of fused and twisted blades catching no light, because there is no light to catch. Aegon the Conqueror forged it from the weapons of his enemies, so the story goes, so that a king would always sit in discomfort, always feel the edges, always remember that power has a cost. Whether Joffrey has ever understood that story is unclear. Whether he is capable of understanding it is a question the small council is beginning, very quietly, to ask itself. In the room where Cersei cannot sleep, a word she will not say presses against the inside of her thoughts like a crack in stone. Small for now, invisible perhaps to anyone not looking directly at it, but present. Already present, already spreading. And on a road to the north, a rider is answering a question, and a woman is watching his face, and the hesitation she has already clocked will matter more than his answer, which she has already decided she does not fully believe. Tywin Lannister does not arrive. He descends. There is a difference, and everyone in King's Landing feels it the moment his outriders clatter through the gates of the Red Keep in the gray light of morning, their armor not ceremonial, their horses not slowed. He comes from the west with the weight of Casterly Rock behind him and the patience of a man who has spent years waiting for precisely this moment. Not the moment of crisis, but the moment when crisis creates an opening wide enough to walk through without asking permission. He does not ask permission. He never has. The gates open because gates open for Tywin Lannister, in the same way that rooms go quiet, the same way that men find reasons to be elsewhere, not from love, never from love, from something older and more reliable than love. He is inside the Tower of the Hand before the small council has been summoned. He is seated at the head of its table before half of them arrive. The seal is already on the document when Varys enters, and the spider who knows everything, who has built his entire existence on knowing everything before it happens, reads the document and says nothing. He says nothing because there is nothing to say that Tywin has not already accounted for. The document names him Hand of the King. It bears a seal that is close enough to royal authority to hold, and by the time anyone thinks to challenge its legitimacy, Tywin will have made himself so necessary that the challenge will die in the throat of whoever considers making it. This is how Tywin has always operated, not with drama, with arithmetic. Joffrey is confined to his chambers by noon. The word used is illness. The word spreads through the keep in the way that convenient words always spread, quickly, without question, accompanied by the tight-lipped nods of servants who understand that their continued employment depends on not looking too closely at the gaps. Joffrey is ill. Joffrey requires rest. Joffrey is not to be disturbed by matters of state, which is to say that Joffrey is not to be involved in matters of state, which is to say that Joffrey is, for the moment, a king in name only in a keep that has quietly rearranged itself around a different center of gravity. Cersei stands in the corridor outside her son's chambers, and she understands exactly what has happened. She understands it the way one understands the moment a door is locked from the outside, not with surprise, with the cold clarifying recognition of something she should perhaps have seen coming sooner. She does not go to her father, not yet. She waits because Cersei Lannister has learned through years of proximity to power that was never quite hers to hold, that the timing of an approach matters as much as the approach itself. Her father, meanwhile, goes down. The black cells are below the dungeons, below the level where torchlight feels like light rather than an apology for darkness. They are below the place where sound travels normally, where voices carry and echo and have the ordinary properties of voices. Down here, sound becomes something else, thickened, absorbed, returned to the speaker in a form slightly diminished, as if the stone itself is consuming it. Tywin descends with 2 guards and a torch, and the particular stillness of a man who finds discomfort beneath his notice. He has stood on battlefields. He has walked through the aftermath of sieges. A cold corridor is nothing. A cold corridor is simply a cold corridor. Ned Stark sits in the way that men sit when they have stopped expecting rescue, but have not yet decided what to do with that absence of expectation. He is not broken. Tywin notes this with something that is not quite respect and not quite frustration, a kind of professional acknowledgement, the way one general assesses another across the distance of a field not yet contested. He is hollow in certain ways, worn down at the edges, but the spine is intact. The spine is always the last thing to go in men like Eddard Stark, and sometimes it never goes at all, which is precisely what makes men like Eddard Stark so extraordinarily dangerous to the stability of realms. Tywin does not sit. He stands, because the geometry of the space between them is a language he speaks fluently, and standing says certain things that sitting cannot. He lays it out without preamble. This is not a conversation about truth, he says. It is a conversation about outcomes. Ned can proclaim publicly and with sufficient conviction that his earlier accusations regarding the legitimacy of the king were made in grief and confusion, that he was misled, that Joffrey Baratheon is the true-born son of Robert and heir to the Iron Throne. In exchange, Ned walks out of this cell. Ned goes home. His daughters go home. A suitable arrangement ensures that both parties honor the terms. Ned looks at him for a long moment. He says no. He says it quietly, without heat, in the way that men say things they have already lived with long enough to know are true. A lie of that size does not save the realm, he says. It only defers its destruction while multiplying the cost. A false king on the Iron Throne is not a solution to a crisis. It is the crisis, made permanent, made official, made into law. Tywin lets the silence sit. And then the door behind him opens, and Catelyn Stark steps through it, and something shifts in Ned's face that has nothing to do with politics. She is thinner than he remembers, he thinks, and older, and the way she crosses the cell toward him carries the weight of the road she has traveled to reach this moment. Her hands find his, both of them. She holds them in the way that she used to hold them when the world outside Winterfell felt very large and very cold, and home was the only real answer to it. She asks him to listen, not to agree, not yet, simply to listen. Because she has spoken to Jaime Lannister, she tells him quietly, and her voice does not waver. She has looked into his face on a road in the hills, and she has asked him what he knows, and what he has told her about Jon Arryn, about how Jon Arryn died, and who moved the pieces that ended his life, and the fracture lines running through the Lannister alliance itself that no one outside that family has been positioned to see, changes the arithmetic of this room in ways that Ned's refusal has not accounted for. Tywin stands very still. He had not known she knew this much. He had not known that Jaime had spoken at all. Tywin Lannister leaves the cell without another word. That is, in its own way, a kind of answer. The silence he leaves behind him settles like stone, and in that stone, Ned Stark finally breathes. Catelyn does not release his hands. She holds them still, and the warmth of her grip is the most honest thing in the room, the only thing in it that does not carry a second meaning or a hidden cost. She tells him what Jaime said. Not all of it yet. Only enough. The name of Jon Arryn. The name of Lysa. The particular and devastating detail that a woman who had stood at a wedding and wept for a sister had also, with the same hands, measured out the poison that would hollow a hand of the king from the inside until he could not speak, could not warn, could no longer say the thing that would have prevented all of this. Ned sits with that. He does not speak immediately. He is not ready to speak. When Jaime Lannister comes to the cell, he comes alone. No escort, no ceremony. He carries a torch because the passage is dark, and he has navigated it himself, and the light it throws across his face makes him look older than his years, and tired in a way that armor has always previously concealed. He sets the torch in the bracket on the wall, and he looks at Ned Stark for a long moment, and what passes between them is not warmth, and is not friendship, and will not be either of those things tonight, but it is recognition. One man looking at another and seeing against his will something that resembles himself. He confesses everything. He does not call it that. He does not use that word. But that is what it is. He tells them about Cersei's arrangement with Lysa Tully, the quiet corridor of letters and promises through which a healthy man was methodically unmade. He tells them about Joffrey, and he does not soften it, does not layer it in the careful language of political implication. He says the words plainly. Robert is not the father. Robert has never been the father. The boy who sits the Iron Throne is the product of a lie that was seeded before the throne was even cold from the last man who sat it. And every oath sworn to that boy, every knee bent, every lord who has committed his house to that name, has built his allegiance on a foundation that does not exist. Catelyn makes a sound that is not quite a word. Ned says nothing. His jaw is a hard line in the torchlight. Then Jaime says the thing that costs him most. He talks about the Mad King, not the version that the realm has told itself for 14 years, the clean story, the necessary story, the story that made Jaime Lannister a villain simple enough to dismiss. He talks about what he heard, the orders Aerys gave in those final hours, the caches of wildfire placed beneath the city at the king's direction, the tens of thousands of ordinary people sleeping above a catastrophe that one man's madness had engineered beneath their feet. He talks about killing Aerys, and then sitting down on the steps of the throne and waiting, and how Robert's men arrived and saw the body and saw the sword and reached their conclusion in the time it takes to draw breath, and how he let them, because explaining would have required a version of himself he did not know how to speak out loud. He does not finish the sentence. He does not need to. Ned Stark stares at him. This is the part that does not resolve quickly, because Ned is not a man who revises his conclusions easily. He built himself on the understanding that some things do not bend. Honor does not negotiate. A man is what he does with the sword in his hand. And yet he is sitting here alive because this man made a choice on a road that honor, by most definitions, would not have compelled him to make. And now this same man is sitting across from him in a dungeon beneath a city his father nearly burned, offering everything he has, his family, his secrets, his position, his brother's life and safety, because he has looked at the board and reached the same conclusion that Ned, in his own way, has been reaching for weeks, that the realm is moving toward fire, that someone must stand in front of it. What Jaime is offering is not redemption. He does not ask for that. What he is offering is utility, a weapon that has been pointing the wrong direction and a hand willing to turn it. He says this plainly and without sentiment. He says that he does not expect Ned to trust him. He says that trust is not the mechanism required. The mechanism required is shared interest in a specific outcome, and that they have. He says it the way a man says something he has rehearsed and then discarded and then rehearsed again, because the polished version did not sound true enough. Ned looks at Catelyn. She looks back at him. In that exchange, there is a conversation that has no words in it, because they have been married long enough to hold entire arguments in silence. In the passage behind the wall, barely a stone's width from where Jaime Lannister sits, confessing the architecture of a kingdom's lies, a small flame bends in a draft. The hand holding the wax does not waver. The letters are already being sealed. The letters are already moving through the city before the table is even set. This is the nature of power in King's Landing. That preparation outpaces event. That the moment a negotiation becomes possible, it has already been anticipated, already been threaded with contingency and counter-move. Varys knows this. Littlefinger knows this. And so when the Tower of the Hand is made ready, when maps are unrolled across the long oak table and candles are placed at intervals like sentinels, both men arrive already knowing more than they will say and saying more than they will reveal. They take their places along the wall, not as participants, but as witnesses, which is itself a kind of participation. The room is aware of them. The room breathes differently with them in it. Tywin Lannister enters last, because men like Tywin Lannister are always last. He does not survey the room. He does not need to. He takes his seat at the table's head as though the chair were built for him specifically, and perhaps, in every practical sense, it was. His hands settle flat upon the maps. His eyes move once, to Ned Stark, to Catelyn, to the empty chair where Robb Stark is not sitting, because Robb Stark is in the north with an army, which is the only language Tywin has ever respected. Theon Greyjoy sits in that empty chair. He sits in it uncomfortably, which is the correct way to sit in a chair that belongs to someone else. He is young, and he is proud, and the pride is doing most of the work today, filling in the spaces where experience has not yet grown. He carries Robb's terms in a sealed letter and also in memory, because Robb told him to commit them to memory in case the letter was taken. The letter has not been taken. Theon touches it anyway, a small unconscious gesture, the way a man checks a wound. Ned Stark sits across from Tywin. This is the first time they have shared a room without it being a room of captivity, and the difference is significant. Ned is gaunt in the way that dungeons make men gaunt, carrying the particular gravity of someone who has recently looked down into the place where the world ends and stepped back from the edge. But he sits straight. This matters. His spine is a flag. Catelyn sits beside him, and she does not touch him, and the restraint of that small absence of touch says everything about what it is costing her to be here, to be calm, to be strategic, rather than the thing she actually is, which is a mother and a wife and a woman who has been afraid for a very long time. Jaime takes his seat beside his father, and the distance between them at that table, though they are perhaps 4 feet apart, is the distance between two countries that share a border and a history of war. Theon delivers the terms. He delivers them well, steadily, without performance, with a precision that suggests Robb trained him specifically for this moment, which is true. The terms are not gentle. Full northern independence, the immediate release of Eddard Stark and his daughter Sansa, and the removal of Joffrey from the throne to be replaced by a legitimate claimant of Baratheon blood. The room absorbs these terms the way stone absorbs water, slowly and with resistance. Tywin dismisses them, not with anger, because Tywin does not waste anger on this he considers beneath the threshold of actual threat. He dismisses them with arithmetic. He tells the room what it would cost the crown to concede independence to the north, what it would signal to every other lord with a grievance and a sword, how the map changes when you begin removing pieces from it. He speaks with the measured certainty of a man who has been right often enough that he has forgotten what uncertainty feels like. He does not say the terms are refused. He says they are impossible, which he considers a distinction. And then Jaime speaks. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. He says that independence is negotiable, or rather, that some version of it, some structured autonomy with obligations preserved, is a more viable outcome than what the current trajectory provides, which is a war the crown cannot win cleanly and cannot afford at all. He says it methodically. He builds the case in stages, each premise laid before the next, like stones across a river. He does not look at his father while he speaks. This is also significant. A man who looks at his father while arguing with him is seeking approval. Jaime has stopped seeking it. He is simply building the argument in the air and letting it stand there. The room has gone very still. Tywin looks at his son the way a general looks at a fortification he did not know existed on a road he thought he knew. The expression is not quite anger. It is something colder. It is reassessment. Theon watches this and understands what he is watching. Varys watches it and files it somewhere behind his eyes. Littlefinger watches it with the quiet pleasure of a man who collects fault lines. Catelyn watches Jaime Lannister argue against his own father on behalf of a position that serves the North, and she does not soften toward him. She is not capable of that yet, may never be. But she recalibrates. She recalibrates the way a navigator recalibrates when the stars appear in different positions than the charts predicted. The charts are not wrong. The world has simply moved. The argument between Tywin and Jaime does not escalate. It does not need to. The escalation is already implicit. In the flatness of Tywin's voice, in the way Jaime's jaw is set, in the word father that Jaime does not say, and Tywin does not invite. They have had this conversation before, this specific one, about what the Lannister name requires and what it costs, and they have never resolved it, and they will not resolve it today. But they are having it in front of witnesses, and that is new. That is something that cannot be taken back. It is into this specific moment, this charged and fragile architecture of competing silences, that the doors open, not slowly, not with ceremony. They open the way doors open when someone has decided that authority supersedes procedure, which is to say, they open with violence, with the sound of impact, with the particular quality of noise that means a room is about to change its entire purpose. Joffrey enters. He is wearing his crown and his certainty and very little else in the way of preparation. Behind him come 3 knights of the King's Guard in white cloaks, and their hands are on their swords, and the room understands immediately what this means. Joffrey looks at Ned Stark. He looks at him the way boys look at things they want to destroy. With a hunger that has not yet learned shame, he speaks. His words are a command. They are not phrased as a command because he lacks the vocabulary for it. They are phrased as inevitability, as something already decided, as a resumption of a process that was only interrupted, never canceled. He is here to finish what the Sept of Baelor was supposed to finish. He says this in his own particular way, which is loudly and without subtlety, and the room hears every word. Ned does not move. This is courage, or it is exhaustion, and it does not matter which, because the effect is the same. A stillness that forces the room to move around it. The King's Guard advances. What happens next is not planned. This is important. The things that change the shape of history are very rarely planned. Theon Greyjoy is on his feet and moving before he has formed a conscious thought about it, because Theon Greyjoy has a particular relationship with instinct, which is that he follows it before he can interrogate it, which has always been simultaneously his greatest flaw and his occasional virtue. The Kingsguard knight nearest to Ned Stark does not see him coming. No one sees it coming. Theon hits the knight low and sideways with the full and imprecise force of a young man who grew up rough on islands where men still solve problems with their bodies. And the knight goes down, and the sword that was an inch from beginning its arc toward a hand, toward a wrist, toward something irreversible, that sword clatters and skids across stone. The room explodes into motion. Jaime is standing. His hand goes to the place where his sword would be and is not. Tywin does not move, which is itself a kind of movement, a statement made in stillness. Catelyn is in front of Ned before she has decided to be there. Varys has disappeared from his place along the wall. Not fled, simply redistributed, somewhere nearer to the door, somewhere useful. Joffrey is shouting. His voice has not yet finished breaking, and so the shout has 2 registers, a boy's and a man's, neither fully in control. Theon is on the floor with the Kingsguard knight, and the knight is larger and trained and recovering, and the calculus of that particular contest is not in Theon's favor, and Theon knows this, and he holds on anyway. Ned Stark is alive. He is standing. He is looking at Theon Greyjoy. at this young man from the Iron Islands who served as a ward and a hostage, and who was just, for reasons that may not even be clear to Theon himself, thrown his body between a Lannister sword and a Stark throat. And something in that look, in the specific quality of what Ned's face does in this moment, suggests that the calculation between them has just been permanently and irrevocably altered. Littlefinger watches all of this from his corner, and his expression carries a small, almost involuntary interest. The way a man looks when something unexpected improves a plan he was already running. The room has not finished moving. The alliances in it have not finished shifting. Joffrey is still speaking, still commanding, still certain that his crown makes him the loudest thing in the space, and he is wrong about this, and the room knows it, and Joffrey does not know that the room knows it. Jaime looks at his father. Tywin looks at the door. And somewhere in the city, the letters that were sealed while Jaime Lannister was still confessing the shape of his usefulness are arriving in hands that have been waiting for exactly this. The letters arrive before dawn. That is the first thing to understand. Before Joffrey has stopped speaking, before the room has finished rearranging itself around the new geometry of Jaime's defiance, the mechanism Tywin Lannister set in motion days ago has already completed its first revolution. This is how Tywin operates. He does not react. He has already acted, and what appears to be his reaction is merely the visible portion of a structure long since built in secret. The small council does not convene because of what happened in that room. The small council convenes because Tywin decided it would convene, and the events in that room provided the final evidence required to make his case unassailable. The testimonies are presented without theater. Tywin does not require theater. He has affidavits from Maester and Steward and sworn sword alike, each documenting a specific incident, a specific command given, a specific cruelty enacted without cause or proportion. There is the matter of the gold cloaks dispatched to kill Robert's bastards. There is the matter of a court musician whose fingers were removed for a song Joffrey found insufficient. There is the matter of Sansa Stark, beaten before the court with a smile that courtiers have spent months trying to forget. Tywin places these documents on the table one at a time, and each one lands with the quiet finality of a stone dropped into still water. He does not editorialize. He does not need to. Jaime stands at his father's left hand and says almost nothing. His presence says it for him. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard is supposed to protect the king. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard is standing here beside these documents, having already broken open the cell of a man his king condemned. The message is not subtle. It is not meant to be subtle. It is meant to be irreversible, and it is. What remains of Joffrey's reign ends in a room he is not permitted to enter. That, more than anything, is the shape of his dethronement. He does not stand before the council and hear the charges. He does not have the dignity of a trial or the theater of a formal accusation. The decision is made without him, in the way that decisions about pieces that have become liabilities are always made quickly and quietly by the hands that were moving them all along. By the time Joffrey is summoned, the succession is already settled. Tommen will be crowned within the fortnight. The regency will be managed by a council in which Tywin's influence is total and unambiguous. Joffrey is not being punished. He is being corrected. The distinction in Tywin's mind is meaningful. Cersei's grief is not quiet. It never could be. There is a particular kind of pain that does not know how to live inside a human body without breaking through its surfaces. And Cersei Lannister has always felt everything at a volume the world struggled to contain. Her screaming moves through the Red Keep like weather, like something the stones themselves absorb and remember. She goes to the guards she trusts, the ones whose loyalties she cultivated through years of proximity and favor, and she finds that the calculus has already shifted beneath her feet. Some of them look at her with genuine sympathy. None of them move. Loyalty without institutional support is a sentiment, not a force, and Cersei has always confused the two. Littlefinger, when she finds him, is courteous and measured and utterly immovable. He expresses sorrow naturally. He is very good at expressing sorrow. What he does not express is any intention of redirecting the resources he has already quietly committed to the new arrangement. A stable Tommen is a long game. A volatile Joffrey was always a burning house, and Littlefinger has never been sentimental about burning houses. He watches her with that same small involuntary interest from the previous night, the look of a man whose plan has just been confirmed by the precise variable he was waiting to confirm it. He does not say this. He says something kind and useless instead. Cersei understands in this moment, with a clarity that is almost physical, that she has been outmaneuvered not by an enemy, but by arithmetic. Joffrey leaves King's Landing on a gray morning with a modest escort and no ceremony. The departure is managed like a logistical arrangement rather than an exile, which is of course the point. There's a holdfast in the Westerlands, remote enough to constitute isolation without appearing to be imprisonment, comfortable enough to prevent martyrdom. He will want for nothing material. He will be kept safe and watched and still. He is told this in language designed to soothe, in language that acknowledges his former station without affirming it. And he listens with the expression of a boy who has not yet understood what has happened to him. The tower they give him has a window that faces west toward the sea. The sea is distant enough that it appears on clear days as a pale suggestion along the horizon, barely a color, barely a shape. He stands at this window on the first evening, and for a long time he does not move and he does not speak. There is no court here. There are no supplicants, no swords at his command, no audience to perform cruelty for. There is only the gray light and the distant water and the absolute silence of a boy who has been removed from the one thing that told him what he was. He does not yet know that in King's Landing, Tommen is already being measured for a crown. He does not yet know that Ned Stark is still breathing, that the one act of mercy his uncle performed against his will has become the hinge on which history turned. He knows only the window and the sea and the strange unfamiliar weight of being finally irrevocably small. In the capital, the preparations are moving quickly. There are arrangements to be made, alliances to be consolidated, and Jaime Lannister is at the center of all of them in ways that feel both earned and precarious, and Ned Stark, alive and no longer condemned, is about to become a problem that nobody has yet decided how to solve. The gates of King's Landing open before dawn, when the city is still caught between darkness and the gray suggestion of light, and Ned Stark rides through them without looking back. This is not bravado. This is not the performance of a man who has made his peace. This is something quieter and more final than either of those things. The measured stride of a man who understands, with every step his horse takes north, that the city behind him was always trying to kill him, and that the fact of his survival is not a victory so much as a postponement of reckoning. Sansa rides at his side, her posture arranged carefully, her face composed in the way that King's Landing has taught her, the way that grief and fear and the long labor of survival all eventually resolve into a kind of stillness. She does not speak for the first hour, neither does he. The Lannister honor guard flanks them at a respectful distance, and this too is a message. Not a cage, but a boundary. Not imprisonment, but the careful, deliberate architecture of an arrangement still finding its shape. The King's Road unspools ahead of them through land going amber and rust with the turn of autumn, and the world beyond the capital is enormous and real in a way that stone corridors and candlelit cells are not. There's wind here. There's the smell of earth and turned leaves and cold water moving somewhere beyond the tree line. Ned breathes it with the concentrated attention of a man relearning the basic grammar of freedom. He sends the raven from the first way castle they reach. The letter is not long. It does not need to be. He writes with the economy of a man who understands that his son will read every word multiple times, searching for hidden instructions, for codes, for the tactical subtext that might be embedded between the lines. So he leaves none. He writes plainly. He is alive. He is riding north. Robb is to stand down the armies. The banners are to be folded. The war camps are to be dismantled. The North will have its dignity returned to it by law, not by blood. And this is not a surrender. It is a choice, which is a different and far more powerful thing. At Moat Cailin, the raven arrives at mid-morning. Robb reads it once standing, then reads it again seated, then reads it a third time aloud to the men assembled in the great hall, his voice gaining steadiness with each recitation, as though the words themselves are a kind of anchor. The Great Jun's cup hits the stone floor before Robb finishes the second paragraph. The sound of it rings outward through the hall like something decisive. He calls it surrender. He uses other words too, louder ones, but surrender is the one that lands heaviest and sits longest in the silence that follows. The younger lords look to Robb. The older ones look to each other. And Robb, young enough to feel the fury of it in his chest, old enough to understand the weight of what his father has written, lets the silence hold a moment longer than is comfortable. Then he commands the army home. He does not raise his voice. He does not explain himself or seek consensus. He folds the letter with care, tucks it into his coat, and repeats the order with the flat, unhurried certainty of a man who has decided that the shape of his father's sacrifice will not be unmade by his own impatience. There is fury in the room. There is also, beneath the fury, a vast and exhausted relief that nobody with any pride will immediately acknowledge. Men who have been sharpening their swords and steeling themselves for slaughter do not easily admit that they are glad to be walking away. But they are. The relief moves through the hall like something physical, like a change in pressure, and Robb feels it even as the Great Jon glowers and the cups stay unrefilled, and the war that nearly swallowed the realm begins, very slowly and with great reluctance, to fold itself back up. It takes 2 more days for the Lannister honor guard and the Stark party to reach the edge of the neck, where the road narrows and the world becomes marshland and mist, and the old silence of a land that has swallowed armies whole. It is here, on the 3rd morning of the ride north, that Jaime Lannister brings his horse alongside Ned's and matches his pace, and they ride together for a while in the particular quiet of 2 men who have no script left to follow. When Jaime speaks, he does not look at Ned. He watches the road. He asks what Ned would have done differently. During the sack, if he had arrived at the Red Keep an hour earlier, if the timing had shifted, if he had been the one to find Jaime standing over the dead king with a sword still wet. Ned is quiet for a long time, long enough that the question might have dissolved entirely into the sound of horses and the distant movement of water through reeds, long enough that a different man might have thought he had pushed too far. Then Ned says he would have listened first. Jaime says nothing. He does not deflect, does not defend, does not reach for the sharpness that has always been his first instinct when cornered by the truth. He sits with it. He lets it settle. And after a moment, he nods once, a small movement, barely perceptible, weighted with everything that cannot be said aloud between two men shaped by opposing loyalties and the long shadow of a dead king's fire. The road ahead is open. The army behind them is beginning its slow march home, and somewhere north of the neck, a castle is waiting for a lord who was not supposed to survive long enough to see it again. The agreement comes not in a throne room, but in a solar, a modest chamber above the river at Casterly Rock, where the windows face east and the morning light arrives cold and without ceremony. Tywin Lannister prefers it this way. He has never trusted rooms built for spectacle. Spectacle is for men who need to remind others of their power. Tywin has never needed reminding. Stannis Baratheon arrives without banners. This is his first concession, and he makes it without acknowledging it as one, which is perhaps the only kind of concession Stannis is capable of. He dismounts in the outer yard, hands his reins to no one in particular, and walks through the gates of a Lannister stronghold as though he is simply entering a room he has been meaning to visit for some time. His jaw is set. His eyes are the eyes of a man who has already calculated every possible outcome and has chosen to be here regardless. Not because it is comfortable, but because it is correct. The proof he carries is not dramatic in its form. No dragons, no wildfire, no revelation that shakes the stones. It is parchment. Letters, the careful accumulation of testimony gathered across months by men who understood that the truth of Joffrey's birth had value beyond vengeance, that it was a lever, and levers move things that armies cannot. Stannis sets the documents on Tywin's table and does not speak. He does not need to. Tywin reads. He reads slowly, which is itself a kind of answer. A man who reads slowly is a man who already knows what the words say and is measuring not their content, but their weight. What emerges from that room after 3 hours and 2 fires lit against the autumn cold is not a victory for either man. It is something rarer and more durable than victory. It is an arrangement. Tommen will remain king, young, gentle Tommen, who has committed no crime beyond being born to the wrong father and the wrong mother in a castle where everyone pretends otherwise. He will reign under a regency council that Tywin will dominate in everything but name, because Tywin understands that the name does not matter. The name is for poets and chronicles. The function is what endures. And in exchange, Stannis receives what he has wanted since the moment Robert's breath stopped. Acknowledgement. Written, witnessed, sealed. Should Tommen die without issue, the throne passes to Stannis Baratheon, the last lawful son of Steffon and Cassana, the brother who was always told that second place was close enough. It is not close enough. It has never been close enough. But it is something. And Stannis, who has built his entire architecture of self on the understanding that what is right and what is easy are almost never the same thing, accepts it with the silence of a man who has just won a battle that no one else in the realm knows was ever fought. Tywin watches him leave. He stands at the window, the eastern one, the cold one, and he turns the outcome over in his mind the way a jeweler turns a stone toward the light, looking for flaws. He finds very few. The crown's debts, which have grown to a figure that would have bankrupted a lesser dynasty already, are being quietly restructured through Braavosi intermediaries who understand that a collapsed throne is worth less to them than a stable one with manageable terms. The Iron Bank does not wage war. It has no need to. It simply waits and adjusts and applies pressure in the way that water applies pressure, not through force, but through persistence, through the slow certainty that it will find every crack. What the bank has now is not loyalty to the Lannisters, or to Tommen, or to Stannis. What it has is information. The truth of the succession, held like a coin that has not yet been spent. And that, Tywin knows, is the most dangerous kind of leverage. The kind that does not announce itself. He considers this for a long time. Then he allows himself, privately, in the silence of a room where no one can observe the expression, something that is almost satisfaction. He has saved the throne from financial ruin without committing a single Lannister soldier, without conceding a title, without giving Stannis anything that costs blood. The realm breathes again, shakily, uncertainly, but it breathes. Across the narrow sea, in a city that smells of salt water and ambition, the news arrives in fragments, as news from Westeros always does, passed through merchants and sailors and men who sell information the way others sell cloth, by the yard, at whatever price the market will bear. A Pentoshi merchant, with careful eyes and careful hands, lays out what he knows across a table that has seen better conversations, and Daenerys Targaryen listens without expression, which is how she listens to everything now. The throne is contested. There is a king no one believes in. There is a claimant who has accepted half of what he deserves. There are Lannisters at the center of all of it, pulling threads. She does not speak immediately. She stands and moves to the window, and the window here faces west, which is not an accident. It has never been an accident. Then she turns back to the room, to Ser Jorah, who watches her with a particular attention of a man who has spent years learning to read the silence between her words. And she says, "They must move faster." Jorah begins to ask what she means, whether she intends the fleet or the... He does not finish the sentence. He does not need to. The gates of Winterfell open the way they always have. Slowly, deliberately, with the groan of old iron and older wood, as though the castle itself is deciding whether to allow entry. The courtyard fills with breath and cold air, and the gathered weight of people who have been waiting longer than they expected to wait. And when the rider comes through first, then the second, then the man himself, there is no cheering. There is something more than cheering. There is the particular silence of people who have rehearsed grief and discovered they no longer need it, and do not quite know what to do with the relief that has taken its place. Ned Stark dismounts. He does it the way he has always done everything, without ceremony, without theater, with the quiet economy of a man who considers performance a form of dishonesty. His boots find the snow. His hand releases the reins. And then there is a sound from the far end of the courtyard, a sound that is not quite running, because the legs that carry it are still learning what running means again, still finding their rhythm across uneven ground, and Bran comes toward him with the particular determination of a boy who has decided that nothing, not ice nor pain, nor the long shadow of almost, will slow him now. Ned drops to his knees before the boy reaches him. He does not calculate this. He does not think about what the bannermen will observe, or what the gesture communicates, or how it will be remembered. He simply drops. The way a man drops when something he thought he had lost comes back to him across the snow, and he takes his son in his arms and holds him, and Bran holds him back, and the courtyard watches in complete silence for a moment that belongs entirely to the two of them. No one speaks, no one moves. Even the horses seem to understand. It is only later, after the warmth of the great hall has replaced the cold of the yard, after the torches have been lit and the long table filled and the faces of his remaining family arranged around him like a map of everything the South tried to take, that Ned Stark allows himself to say the thing he has been carrying since King's Landing. He does not soften it. He never softens things. The South nearly devoured them, he says, not nearly defeated them, not nearly bested them in some contest of swords and politics, as though what happened was a fair game played by fair rules. Nearly devoured. He uses that word deliberately, and the word sits on the table between the cups and the candles, and no one reaches past it. He had believed, he tells them, that honor was sufficient, that a man of honest purpose, operating in plain sight, making no secret of his intentions, offered some kind of natural protection against those who operate otherwise. He had believed this the way a man believes in a wall he has never had to test. And then he tested it. The silence in the hall is not uncomfortable, it is attentive. Honor is not armor, Ned says. He says it simply without apology, as though he is delivering a correction to himself as much as to the room. It is the right way to live. He does not retract that, he never will. But the right way to live and the sufficient way to survive are not the same calculation, and a man who fails to understand the difference risks more than himself. He had nearly proved that with his life. He will not prove it with theirs. Then he speaks of what is actually coming. Not the Lannisters, not the succession, not the long-tangled grievances that have kept the great houses turning against each other since before any of them were born. He speaks of the wall and what waits beyond it, and the particular expression on the faces of his bannermen shifts from the attentive gravity of men receiving political instruction to something older and quieter, something that lives below the level of strategy in the part of northern men that has always known the cold is not simply weather. The real war, he tells them, is not the one they have been fighting. This is why, he says, he is sending Robb south. The room moves, not physically. No one rises, no one speaks. But something in the air of the hall shifts with the announcement, a subtle redistribution of weight, and Ned watches the faces of his bannermen cycle through surprise and calculation, and the particular unease of men who had prepared themselves to hate the South and are now being asked to send the heir to Winterfell into its center. Robb does not flinch. He has known this was coming. His father told him the night before, quietly in the solar, with the fire low and the words between them carrying the particular texture of a conversation neither of them will forget. Fight cold, not fire, Ned had said. Whatever they show you down there, whatever games they play, whatever banners they wave, whatever old wounds they try to reopen. Remember what comes from the north. Remember what none of them understand yet. Go south and learn their language and make them believe the north has forgiven what it hasn't. And come home ready. Robb had sat with this for a long moment. Then he had asked his father what he truly believed was coming, what shape it would take, how long they had. And Ned had looked into the fire, and the fire had offered nothing, and he had said, "I do not know how long, but I know it will not wait for us to finish arguing about a throne." Now in the hall, Robb stands to accept the commission his father gives him publicly, and the bannermen watch the young man who will ride south and the old man who is sending him. And somewhere beneath the floor of the great hall, the ancient stones of Winterfell absorb all of it, the grief and the resolution, and the cold pragmatic love of a father handing his son into danger because the alternative is handing him into something worse. Outside, the wind moves through the courtyard, where the snow has already begun to fill in the prints left by Ned Stark's boots and Bran's unsteady steps, covering them quietly, the way the north covers everything it intends to keep. And far to the south, in a city that has not yet heard what Winterfell has decided, a raven lifts from the Maester's tower and banks westward against a sky the color of cold iron, carrying words that will reach the wrong hands before they reach the right ones. A year passes. In the reckoning of kingdoms, a year is almost nothing. A breath held between one crisis and the next, a season traded for its opposite. But there are years that are merely years, and there are years that are ages compressed into 12 months. And the year that follows Jaime Lannister's defiance on the steps of the Great Sept of Baelor belongs entirely to the second kind. It is the year in which the Seven Kingdoms do not fall. That fact alone, quiet, almost unremarkable in the way that averted catastrophes always seem unremarkable afterward, contains within it everything that matters. The gathering at Harrenhal comes in the deep amber of late autumn, when the leaves have already surrendered, and the great ruined towers of the castle stand against a sky that cannot decide between gray and gold. Lords and their retinues arrive across 3 days, their banners strange and almost absurd against those blackened walls, those melted stones that have swallowed ambition before and show no sign of having grown any more forgiving. The Tullys come from Riverrun. The Tyrells send men. Even a Martell representative arrives, watchful and deliberate, carrying grievances that have not been resolved so much as set carefully to one side. What is agreed upon at Harrenhal is not peace in the way that songs describe peace, not the ringing of bells, not the clasping of formerly murderous hands in sudden brotherhood. It is something quieter and more durable than that. It is a mutual recognition of exhaustion. It is the formal acknowledgement, written and sealed and witnessed, that one man's refusal to remain complicit in judicial murder has altered the weight of every political calculation in the realm. They do not say this in the language of the document, but it is present in every clause, in every careful diplomatic evasion, in the fact that the document exists at all. Ned Stark does not attend. His absence is noted. His absence is, in its way, the most eloquent statement anyone makes at Harrenhal. The reminder that the man at the center of everything is already looking elsewhere, already oriented toward a horizon that has nothing to do with thrones. Jaime Lannister arrives at Winterfell in the first true cold of that year's winter, which comes earlier than it should and harder than anyone expected. He comes alone. This is important. He could have come with retainers, with the implicit security of men at his back and horses enough to suggest consequence. But he comes alone, and on a single horse, and wearing no golden armor, because there is no golden armor left to wear. He has been stripped of the King's Guard, formally and publicly, in a ceremony that was designed to humiliate and succeeded, and also, in the way of such things, managed to liberate. He carries a sword he has no current right to offer, and a name that remains, in most of the realm, a synonym for betrayal. He comes to the gates of Winterfell and gives his name to the man standing watch, and the man standing watch goes inside, and the gates do not open. He waits 3 days. The cold is specific and patient and without malice. It does not hate him. It simply surrounds him, which is in some ways worse. He sleeps in what shelter the gatehouse overhang provides. He eats what he has brought. On the 2nd day, a servant brings him bread and a skin of something warm without explanation or instruction, left outside the gate and retrieved by him without ceremony. And he understands this as neither rejection nor welcome, but as something in between, something very much like the North itself. Not cruel, simply unsentimental. On the 3rd morning, the gates open. They meet in the Godswood because Ned Stark meets serious things in the Godswood. The heart tree is there, the red leaves, the carved face that does not judge so much as witness. Ned stands near the black pool, and Jaime crosses the snow toward him. And there is a moment, not long, perhaps 10 seconds, where neither man speaks, and neither man looks away. What passes between them in those 10 seconds is not forgiveness exactly. Forgiveness implies an authority to grant, a position of moral elevation from which absolution can be dispensed. What Ned offers is something more lateral than that. It is the acknowledgement that one complicated man reached across his own self-interest and altered the shape of things, and that this matters, and that mattering is its own form of currency in the economy of honorable men. Jaime offers his sword in service to whatever cause Ned names worthy. He says these words directly. He does not dress them. Ned looks at him for a long moment, and then Ned names only one cause, in 2 words, that point north. What follows is not immediate. There are ravens and arrangements, and the long cold ride that winter makes longer. There are reunions that carry the particular ache of people who have survived something together without quite admitting they survived it together. Jon Snow, who has built himself out of the raw material of duty and the black wool of the Night's Watch, who has looked north and seen things that cannot be fully translated into language. Jon Snow, when his father arrives, allows himself the expression of relief that he has been suppressing for most of a year. They stand together on the battlements of Castle Black in the last narrated moment of a world that has been remade. Ned Stark at the center of it, grayer than he was, and more himself than he has been in years, the weight of the South finally fallen from him the way a man sets down something he carried too long. Jon Snow beside him, steady, watching the darkness with eyes that have already learned to see what is in it. Jaime Lannister at his right hand, stripped of everything that once defined him, which is to say, stripped of everything that was never really him to begin with, wearing the cold like someone who has decided to stop resisting it. The snow begins to fall. It is the wrong snow for the wrong season, unnatural in the way that only the ancient and the patient and the vast can be unnatural, coming not from weather, but from something older than weather, something that does not distinguish between the political arrangements of men, something that finds the wall the same wall, regardless of who stands upon it or what they argued about before they arrived. The flakes are slow. They are almost gentle. They are not gentle. The three men stand in that falling quiet, and behind them, the seven kingdoms carry their new shape, scarred and rearranged, and still improbably standing, forward into whatever the darkness has been preparing. The old war is finished. The true one has not yet begun, and the wall holds for now, as it always has, cold and enormous and indifferent to everything except the simple, enormous fact of its own continuance, which is all it has ever been asked to do, and all it will need to do for a little while longer still.